ended the shutdown. Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
Next topic, James Comey error. Comey, apparently the prosecution made an error where they didn't submit a key document. So given that the statute of limitations on his testimony to Congress and whether there were erroneous statements in that testimony, given that was approaching, and that was when the indictment was filed, and now the indictment was filed, turns out they didn't submit the proper paperwork, I guess he's free to go now, right? At least from that particular session of talking to Congress. Is that your assessment as well?
No, so this is still being resolved. I don't think they've actually ruled yet on dismissing the charges. There's still the hearings. It's not such a simple thing. So remember that a statute of limitations is based off of when you can bring the charges. And technically the charges were brought, they just didn't present the indictment to the grand jury, the new one.
Oh.
So this is where it gets convoluted, is that they did present a series of indictments, and then the timeline is all sorts. I need to be careful with how I talk about this because it's a little fuzzy. I think it's still getting resolved though, that they haven't made a final ruling, and the Department of Justice technically could still appeal if there was a ruling, right? It's not over yet, put it that way. That there are still ways it could go forward. I don't see why they would stop trying to make it go forward, right? That even though these errors did happen, it's not so clear that they wouldn't still try like a different version or try to go back to the grand jury. What I do know is that it looks really bad, right? It looks incredibly unprofessional. At no point in any of these trials or any kind of interaction like this that's so public should something that is a procedural error occur, right? Like at a very minimum, the procedure has to be followed because it is really unclear if the grand jury actually voted as a whole body on the current indictments that Comey's facing, right? Like the 4-person signing off on the indictment is not all the jurors voting on the indictment as worded. I don't know. On its face, it looks unethical. At a bare minimum, it just looks. Remember when I was talking about how I thought that the Comey prosecution probably wouldn't be all too fair? This is the kind of thing I was talking about, that they rushed to judgment, that they misstated, let me make this clear, allegedly, that the prosecution misstated the Constitution, the law, right? Misled the jury in some way. That's not good. None of that's good. It doesn't sound good. It doesn't look good. It doesn't seem good. At a bare minimum, I think that Comey has a very good case to make that the prosecution was unfair, that the case should be dismissed, and for sure should be heard, right? Like the judge should definitely weigh the arguments and make a decision. I just don't know if that rises to the level of outright dismissal. That the question becomes whether, because they did file the charges, could they amend the indictment? Could they send it back to the grand jury and then get the grand jury to vote? Like it's not so clear on what that process is, or if the government still has a remedy here. But it just doesn't look good, right? That's the thing, is that it just doesn't look great at all. And it's not, here's the thing, it's not just a paperwork error. It's the fact that the jury was told something that wasn't necessarily like the whole truth, right? That you have to present a situation as it is. My understanding is there were 2 things that were said in particular that were just really egregious. One was that apparently Comey might have had to testify against himself, which that doesn't, like, people have a right to not self-incriminate themselves. The Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, like, it's unambiguous. And so it was weird that there was an intimation that he might have to like testify against himself or be forced to testify against himself and explain the situation. That doesn't exist. People are not required to testify, period, against themselves. And then the other one that was super fishy was like, oh, we'll have better evidence at trial. So our evidence might be flimsy-ish now. It may not be that much now, but we have better evidence. So just trust us, bro. Just trust us.
Yeah.
Just trust it. It's going to be just fine. We got so much more evidence later down the line. It's no, in a grand jury, my understanding at least, is you're supposed to present the evidence you have to prove why the charge should be put forward.
Both sets of lawyers have to review the same evidence. You can't be like, surprise, I got this.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, in a grand jury, they don't just present all the evidence because they're just presenting a narrative. Here's the reason why we think this person should be charged them. But it is super fishy to be like, oh, we have some evidence, but we're going to have more at trial. Just trust us. Just trust we're going to have better and more evidence on this particular thing at trial. Just trust us. And
Hey, grand jury, I need you to do me a solid. I just need you to do me a solid. I don't have it, but just do me a solid.
yeah, that's the sense that I get from reading the description of what happened. That doesn't look great. So, anyways, that's one of those circumstances where I think there is a case to be made from the Comey defense. Hey, just dismiss these charges. They're not real charges. Honestly, their other argument about how Halligan isn't even like a legal attorney, there's more than nothing there. I think because if you read the statute, when you appoint someone, it's no longer the president that can then appoint the successor. It actually has to go to the judges in the court, in the federal court, after a certain period of time. And it's not so clear that because this job is subject to congressional approval, to Senate approval, right? And so the previous person was an acting attorney. He wasn't the Senate approved. My understanding, I think that's what the case was, is that he wasn't actually like a Senate approved federal U.S. attorney. And so the statute's actually really clear. It says, not the president. It goes to a panel of judges and they decide who the U.S. attorney is in that context. That didn't happen, right? The guy resigns or gets fired, and then Lindsay Halligan gets installed like almost immediately. And then these indictments flow forth from that. And it's, wait a second, did you actually have the authority and the power to do that? And if the answer is no, then all that other stuff is irrelevant anyways, because the charges shouldn't have happened in the first place. And yeah, at that point, the statute of limitations definitely would apply, right? It should. It's as if it didn't happen at all. If it's invalid, that's why I think this saga it's certainly fascinating to look at it as a lay observer, right? This doesn't usually happen. I think in all my memory of federal prosecutions and very public cases and trials and lawsuits, I don't think I've ever seen a situation where a grand jury was like either unintentionally or deliberately, it's not clear, misled in order to secure an indictment. Like, it's a pretty straightforward process. It's laid out unambiguously of like how you do it, and they should have put it up to a vote and then had the indictment from there or not.
Yeah, it just goes to show professionalism in various fields lately just been going down the tubes. Dismal tide. Yeah, more to say on Comey. I thought it would be done, so thanks for that info. But so I don't really have anything to add. But you can say more if you want.
Yeah, the saga is still ongoing. It's not done yet. Even if the judge, so look, even if the judge dismisses the case, which I'm not so sure that'll happen, or I don't know that it even still would be done because they could technically, I think, appeal the decision up the chain, right? Because it's not the highest level of court. They're still at the very lowest rung of the judicial ladder, as it were, for federal cases. I can't help but feel that if the Trump administration really wanted to, they could appeal, right? They would have the power to appeal that decision. It's not the end of the road. I do think that it's certainly a strange saga. We're living in odd times, but the chances of Comey not getting charged with a crime are better now than they were before. That's what it looks like. And also, I think Comey has really good defense lawyers, for sure, because some of the arguments they've been presenting and making are very on solid ground. They're very strong. At least my understanding of the arguments that are being presented. The one other thing is like the discovery process, right? It's that apparently they've been having issues getting all the evidence, or at least they were getting. I don't know if that got resolved, but that's just one of those other things where this is not complicated. That people are supposed to be able to see the evidence against them when they go to trial, right? You get to see who your accusers are. You get to see what the charges are. You get to see the evidence that they have, so you can make a argument that the government hasn't done a good enough job of proving guilt, right? Because it's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense has to be able to prove reasonable doubt. That's the last thing I'll say about the Comey thing. Like, the saga continues. I certainly think within the next month or a few months it's going to be resolved. It doesn't seem like it's going to just drag on.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think this will impact Comey's permanent record. Did you see the one where the man put the money into the Bitcoin ATM? The money is now lost, but thankfully they stopped him from putting all the money he was going to put in. And the cop got on the phone and was like, "Who's this? This is Chase Bank." But it wasn't Chase Bank. But the guy, he put the money in the Bitcoin ATM, and apparently they can't just open the ATM, so he must not have put physical money in. It must have been like an electronic transfer.
Yeah, or like a
Or
check or
something.
something. I was trying to understand how that even works, because if you put physical money into a thing, it's not vacuumed up into nothingness. It goes into like a physical location. So what was preventing them from just contacting the owner of the ATM and saying, "Hey, just give the money back to this guy. This wasn't real. It was all fake." I'm trying to understand how that, because at what point does it become a crime on the part of the ATM owner to even allow the transaction to go through? Because I don't understand at all how that could even happen. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's clearly fraud. If it was US dollars, it would be like, unless it was taken out of the country, it would be like, you're giving it back now. But for some reason, so I'm going to do a poor job of explaining what blockchain is. Blockchain is like a distributed ledger where it does like a calculation that requires a certain amount of computing power. But then once you have the answer to that calculation, it's much easier to put it back and say, yes, that next entry to the ledger checks out, like force of computation must have been applied to that. Then they distribute it to many different ledgers on computers. A ledger is like an accounting sheet, but these are electronic ledgers.
I get that part, right? I understand what's going on there. The issue is, at what point does the medium that allowed that transaction to occur bear any responsibility for the fact that it did occur? Because if somebody gives $1 million to the bank, and the bank's then, "Oh, I'm just going to shower $1 million bills over the city of New York. Oops, can't get all those dollar bills back because I threw it off a building." Like,
They're gone.
okay, they're gone. It's
You're
like,
liable for the million.
yeah, it's like that South Park episode where they go to the bank and they're like,
And
"Here's
it's
your money."
gone.
Oops, it's gone. It's okay, all right.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, at what point does the ATM owner bear any culpability for the fact that it even happened, right? Like, why is there no two-step authentication or something, or verification that says, "Are you sure you're going to do this? Because we can't get you your money back if you do this," or something like that. Or even, why aren't they notifying law enforcement?
There you
Like,
go.
because that's what I'm super confused about this story. It's like law enforcement somehow figured it out, right? I guess they're notified by a family member or something. But it's like, why did they have to get notified by the family member? Like, banks have a know your customer law that they have to follow, where you have to understand who your customers are more than just like basic information. You have to actually understand where the money's from, who they are. There's like a whole bunch of requirements. I don't know. Is the ATM not also a bank? Is like effectively functioning as a bank, right? It takes money, it gives out money. I don't know. I don't know the intricacies of crypto in this regard, but it boggles my mind that so much money was just put into the ATM and there were no safeguards in place.
Yeah, so there's an idea. Now, I don't know how you would do this with the transaction fee, but you could have a holding period. It was like, okay, we're going to hold on to it for a day and then we really will send it. Because I think the ATM owner would make some kind of argument equivalent to that of a common carrier. It's not exactly like a common carrier in that people just speak something onto the telephone and the other party hears it, and it just, but it is kind of, we don't know who, you put your debit card into some gas station ATM and it like makes some kind of calculation, gives you the money or not. But given the irreversibility of it, perhaps a holding period is in order.
But I'm also skeptical on that it is irreversible, right? Who ultimately is liable if they can't figure out where the money went to? Because the money went into something, but they can't figure out where the money went from there. That's what I'm trying to understand. Is it a memory hole? Is it some like abyss? Is it a hole in the ground they just threw the money into, and some dragon like owns it? I'm trying to understand how that works at all.
It must have been an electronic funds transfer. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Otherwise, you could just open the ATM. But, like, the trouble comes from people can have a Bitcoin wallet and you don't know whose Bitcoin wallet it is.
Okay, but
Like
you do know that it is a wallet, right?
Yes, you know it's a wallet.
You know that the money went to somewhere. It's just not
Yeah.
the who, but you do know that it went to a location, right? It didn't just vanish into nothingness.
Correct, but you don't know where the location is because it's connected via cyberspace. So they can
Okay.
conceal their identity and location. That's the trouble.
Yeah,
Like-
that just
Yeah.
seems problematic completely for
Extremely.
other reasons. I don't know, money laundering, all sorts of
Yes.
secrecy stuff. I don't understand. There's got to be a way. There has to be a way that they understand where the money's going. It boggles my mind that if they don't have the actual tools to do that, because there's got to be a way. There's no realistic scenario I can think of for national security reasons that they would allow just huge sums of money to just move where the money's actually going. It just doesn't make any sense.
And initially, they weren't going to. In the teens, pretty much. The people were like, nah, it's a pyramid scheme. What are you talking about? But lately, I'm not going to say since Trump 2, but sometime in the Biden administration, a lot of people's opinions flipped on it. But here, to your point, they don't know where the wallet is, but the wallet's like username, it's not called a username, is plain for everyone to see. Everyone in the entire world can see which username, I think, has the money. So maybe they can issue, we know that this money was ill-begotten, so you have to give it back, username. And if we find out who you are, yeah.
Exactly. So, in whatever location that wallet is, wouldn't there also be laws there about stealing money
Yes,
from people? This
certainly.
is what I don't get. There are treaties in place that say, hey, if a law is committed somewhere else or a crime's broken somewhere else, you still have to be held accountable for it. That's the whole point of money laundering laws.
So what do you think? Bitcoin going to 1 million? It's down in the last month from 120 or so to it hit like 80,000 per Bitcoin recently. It's the most volatile asset, which I think for some traders is part of its appeal.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I
it's-
see it's down 24% in the last 6 months. That's pretty steep.
Way down!
124,000 on October 7th, and now it's down to 84,000. Yeah, that's a pretty steep decline. Yep.
Just it seems to me to just by design be this speculative asset. But the thing is, its supply is programmatically limited to 21 million Bitcoin. So as long as there are people willing to buy, it could always come back. It's a new crazy world. You hear Brave New World, but how about Nutcase New World?
Oh yeah,
Exactly.
no, it's pretty wild. The fluctuations
what
are
do you-
just very extreme.
So what do you think? Bitcoin to 1 million or no?
I'm skeptical, right?
Mike shakes his head disinterestedly.
I don't know. I've always been pretty skeptical of Bitcoin just in general because the problem with it is since it's so decentralized, it's not actually clear who owns the levers of power with respect to Bitcoin. I don't know. I'm just very skeptical of anything that's not backed by a legitimate government because technically this could be a very long running scam where essentially what happens is once they reach 21 million Bitcoin or whatever, a backdoor triggers or something, and then somebody snatches up all the money. This is what I don't understand about this whole system is that if you don't fully understand every aspect of its beginning and its end, that it's like constantly unwinding in some weird puzzle or encryption or whatever. Does anybody actually have full control over Bitcoin? Whoever created it, do they have the ability to influence it in any way, shape, or form? And if that does exist, what's the degree of influence they have over it? And that's why I'm very skeptical of any of these cryptocurrencies because they exist in this like space, this quasi space, right? That's not real, but it's not fake. It's like the the in-between.
The Twilight Zone. I have said about as much as I know about it, and slightly more probably, but I don't know. And I would be skeptical about bringing like an AI expert on to talk to us about it, because they might be like, they have all these. You've seen the South Park post-COVID, and Wendy was like, it gets entranced by it, and just, I'm going to buy this while Ethereum's in the dip. It's like they've got these terms that I'm not gonna say like they hijack the thinking. Just buy the dip. Who says it's a dip and not like a slide into oblivion? But they just name it that. So you have that, and you're dipping a donut in some coffee. Oh, it's just a little dip, man.
I guess maybe my skepticism's also, who's to say that it's only 21 million Bitcoin ever, right? If you can make it one time, why can't you make it more times? If it's just the for now cyber currency, what's preventing more of it from being created in real terms? Like, you just slap on a name to something and say, that's Bitcoin, right? If they could do it once, why can't they do it again? I don't see anything preventing them from doing it. So that's a sort of fiction, I think, that's being spun. It's a finite amount. No, I don't. I'm very skeptical.
It could be a fiction for all I know, and I do know also that, have you heard the term fork in the code? So you can have like a public repository of code, and then usually there's consensus as to where it proceeds, but sometimes there is not consensus, and it goes in two directions. And I always think to myself, what if there's a fork in the Bitcoin code? And that's where its vulnerability lies. But it's a lot like, can I compare it to gold? Can I compare it to diamonds? I guess the question is as to its finiteness, and we don't actually know the answer to that properly examined. But what gets me is the transaction costs. Everything you get these Bitcoin mining rigs, and then they make money anytime somebody exchanges the Bitcoin. That's why it's not going to replace the old greenback, unless, of course, you can reprogram that, because nobody's going to want, somebody takes 2% off the top every time I hand this bill to somebody else. Nobody's going to want that. But I shouldn't speak more unless I start talking about something I don't know on this particular topic.
I'm also skeptical because the technology relies so much on the internet. And as we know and understand, the internet has vulnerabilities. If you remember that CrowdStrike update that shut down so many, I think it was CrowdStrike, where it shut down like so many of the Microsoft operating systems around the world, they just went down.
It was a day I remember very well.
If you have a currency that is 100% digital, that relies on the infrastructure staying stable, right, and able to connect to it, if it's so fragile as to crumble at one update from one company, that's worrisome in its own way, because that's how you get economic paralysis, right? If you have an economy that's only Bitcoin or only cryptocurrencies, and their internet infrastructure is taken out by an EMT or something, or who knows, right? A natural disaster, all of a sudden you have difficulty transacting any like day-to-day transactions, like groceries and buying stuff. People, they would have to regress to like barter. I'll give you my chicken for a bike or something, right? I guess people do that, but that takes a lot more time, and it's fraught with risk and danger, right?
Yeah, like a chicken's $5. How much is a bike? 100, right? That's not a good deal. That's not a good deal. I want at least 20 chickens. Wait, but where am I going to refrigerate them?
I'll give you a goat for 10 chickens and 100 eggs. No, none of that. I don't even know how that. The figuring out the actual value is complicated enough. But yeah, the whole point is that it seems very vulnerable, right? It's not, when you have a physical currency backed by like a physical thing, like money or gold or like metals, like it's in a physical place. It's a real thing. This is different. This is nebulous, out in the nether, the ether, right?
Yeah, it's in the nether. Everything in cyberspace is in the nether now.
Yeah, but it's out there in the cosmic unknown, right? And the problem with that is you need a way to access the cosmic unknown and a way to transact things there that's stable. And unfortunately, almost all human inventions are flawed in some way and aren't always the most stable things.
Okay, Texas map struck down. said the story that I sent you. So is the redistricting craze over? Probably not, because the Supreme Court reversed the strike down, at least temporarily. So for viewers of the podcast, I always say viewers rather than listeners, I prefer viewers. We talked about how there's this arms race, and Texas, they're trying to put in place a new congressional map, which is probably going to give Republicans 5 more seats. California approved Proposition 50 to enable such redistricting in favor of the ruling party, in that case the Democrats. These are not the only places where this will happen, and it seems like a race to the bottom, but if you don't participate in an arms race, you lose. That was the conclusion of the previous podcast. So a court said, no, you can't do the 5 extra seats for Republicans, and then the Supreme Court said, yes, you can. Or you can for now. Go ahead.
It wasn't the whole Supreme Court. It was Alito put the stay, since he oversees that. So how the Supreme Court works is each judge oversees like one of the appellate districts, so that they can act of their own volition in making decisions. Do you remember the SNAP and clawbacks and how they're like funding it, partially funding it, not funding it, and that whole debacle? How it was one of the Supreme Court justices who stayed the full funding decision until the Supreme Court weighed in. Same deal here. It's just Alito is the one who is doing the stay of the decision to cancel the redistricting until the Supreme Court weighs in. And the Supreme Court will either say yay or nay, right? They will either approve the redistricting effort or they will decline to hear the case, in which case it would just revert to the decision getting rid of the redistricting. So stay tuned, right? All that's happening now is just the Supreme Court is weighing whether to hear the case or review the case rather as the full court. That's where we're at. But it was just one judge. It was just Alito.
Just one judge. Okay, cool. Who ended the shutdown? Who was it? Not a political science professor, Mike. I can edit out the not the. I'm not good.
I'm still not a political science professor. I'm not hired by any university to teach. The shutdown was ended by, I think it was 8 Senate. There's a few independent senators, and then I think 6 Democratic senators, plus all the Republican senators, ended the shutdown by finding some kind of compromise deal to make it. And then the full Congress voted, and the president signed the end of the shutdown. That's who ended the shutdown, was the president not vetoing the agreement that was reached by the House and the Senate. Who definitely didn't end the shutdown was the holdouts on the Democratic side, the senators. They still wanted to keep going. But no, it was the ones who capitulated with such rich statements as, our strategy didn't work, so I guess we have to give up now. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially it was like, our strategy to not act so that we could use this as leverage to accomplish a goal didn't work. It's not working. I guess we have to give up now, even though there were signs that it was working because of the results of the election, that the American public clearly was paying attention and voted for like Democrats across the board because they saw what was going on with the sort of disingenuous statements from the speaker and the very unnerving and bizarre actions of the Trump administration to starve people, to not fully fund SNAP, even if there was money there to do it. And it's, oh no, helping starving people, what a huge burden. People are legally entitled to the safety net that the government said they're entitled to by passing the law that said that it was supposed to happen. And they passed another law that said that there was money set aside just in the case of a government shutdown that was supposed to be applied to giving people food. Oh no, can't do that. Can't help people. Oh no. And yeah, who ended the shutdown was the Democrat senators who chickened out. In particular, the ones in Virginia, and then Fetterman, and then that guy from Maine. He's not actually a Democratic senator. I think he's an independent, but he caucuses with the Democrats. Angus King.
Mainly a Democrat.
But if you want the real answer of who ended the shutdown, it's a bunch of people who aren't up for re-election until 2028 or 2030 or are retiring from Congress. And so they are less invested, put it this way, in the game. That they're looking at the next thing, right? If that's retirement or if that's going to work as a lobbyist or some other place in government. but they're not as invested in retaining their position in the Senate if they're not running for reelection. And so they could take not really a risk, but they could take a vote that bears no real political consequence for them. Does it hurt the Democratic Party's overall brand and image, the appearance of having courage and a backbone and like political savvy? Sure. Individually, those senators don't really face any real political fallout from this because if you pay careful attention, none of them are up for reelection in 2026. And so it allows for political cover for any of the other Democratic senators who wanted to show that they were still fighting and the theater of it. That's why Schumer could still vote against it because, no, I'm still fighting for health care subsidies because I'm voting no. But you're the minority leader of the party. If you really didn't want it to happen, you could have used the leverage you have within the Senate caucus to. There's a lot more power than is advertised for the minority leader in terms of fundraising, and there's a number of things that could have happened that clearly didn't. But the Senate's a weird thing, anyways, because each senator is like their own little island. They exist within their own little kingdoms, and you don't need so much unity within the Democratic or Republican caucus as a senator that you can take zany and unorthodox and out of the mainstream positions on things and still be just fine as a senator. Because senators they have 3 different election cycles, right? At any given point, only a third of the Senate is ever up for reelection. And so they have a lot more leeway in terms of how much they have to actually care about anything, which is by design. We've talked about this, that senators have way more power, outsized power, really, compared to the members of the House. Because the members of the House, they have to act, right? They have to deliver tangible things they can bring to their constituencies. Say, look, here's the shiny object. I did it. I made it happen.
Yeah.
I brought you money. I brought you stuff. I built a bridge. I built a highway. I did it. Look at me. I did it. Because they're up for re-election, right? Every term, right? Every single time they run for election, anytime they get elected, they immediately have to start their re-election campaign because the clock is ticking, right? They've got less than 2 years if they want their spot again to get reelected. That means that they're always on that sort of treadmill. They're always like running in a circle because they have to fundraise and they have to do stuff in Congress. And so when Mike Johnson kept Congress from actually meeting for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, however long that was, all of those representatives were panicking because someone put it in context for Grijalva when I was listening to the news about this, that it was like a tenth of her whole congressional term that she wasn't seated. They didn't administer the oath. Like 10% is a lot, right? That's a lot of time for a job that she wasn't allowed to do because she didn't have access to the resources that you get when you're actually a representative of, or you're recognized rather as a House representative. So yeah, in terms of the question, who ended the shutdown? Ultimately, it's going to be the American people for electing senators and representatives who wanted the shutdown to end, right? At the end of the day, it's that electorate, however slim the number is, of 30, 40% of the total electorate ended the shutdown. And I guess also it would be that the clamor and the noise from those who wanted the subsidies extended wasn't loud enough to register for the Republican members of the House and the Republican members of the Senate and the president to give them pause, to make them go, oh, maybe we should actually do something, as opposed to just saying, up, nothing we can do. There's nothing we who have all the power of the money and the purse and the things to do, right? We control the calendar and when people show up to do the job, nothing we can do. We can't do anything. We've got no power whatsoever. It's no, they've got power. It's just that the voices weren't loud enough. What do I mean by that? There have been in U.S. history a few campaigns that were very effective from start to finish from when the legislation actually passed in terms of swaying public opinion and getting things actually changed. Mothers Against Drunk Driving is probably the quintessential example. From the time that the group was formed to the time it became legislation to make the drinking age 21, not that much time at all. Very effective campaign. And then the other would be the Americans with Disabilities Act, where the disability advocates showed up to the steps of the Capitol and crawled up the steps and said, help us, right? Fix this problem. It did. It got fixed. probably the most powerful example of an international consensus that passed really fast from the US Congress actually had to do with the hole in the ozone layer caused by hydrofluorocarbons. You know that hairspray, it was causing a hole in the ozone and it looked bad. Like it looked really bad. And so they came up with a solution pretty fast. Almost universal consensus. Fixed it. Right? When Congress wants to do things, it gets done fast. Look at this Epstein file release. The discharge position came through. They had the vote, and then the Senate didn't even wait all that long. It was a matter of hours, right? They bypassed like all the procedural stuff and just did a unanimous consent vote. Said, "Yep, it's through," and then it was through in a day, right? If they really wanted to fix things, anything really, they could anytime. The shutdown could do it in a day. They say it could be a sentence. Actually, the sentence would be, "We will fund all things appropriated by Congress for until this amount of time," like a sentence. Each side votes on it, it passes, done. They don't do that. No. Part of the theater of it, actually part of the game, if you really want to look at it, is this back and forth. It is this facade, this edifice of them fighting and disagreeing and blah, 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 because you can sneak stuff in when you've got these bigger votes. The newest example I can think of, there's two of them. One is those senators that can sue to get paid from the government for having their phone records looked at. Totally bizarre, where it's just like a handful of senators can get real money from the American taxpayer, and because law enforcement did their job. It's really super bizarre. And then the other one was the banning of all hemp products that was snuck into the shutdown vote. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Let me see. The Mitch McConnell amendment banning hemp products.
Wait, didn't Thomas Jefferson grow hemp?
I'm not sure, but I know it's a big market. But anyways, the part of the reason that it was slipped in, not secretly, but it was just added in to the funding bill. It bans most intoxicating hemp-derived products by redefining the legal definition of hemp and closing this hemp loophole from the Farm Bill. So essentially what it's doing is shutting down a huge amount of the market for this product. And from what I'm reading, it's a $28 billion industry, and 95 to 97% of the current products in the market would become illegal. That's pretty staggering for a vote that was supposedly just to continue funding the government. Last I checked, it wasn't a ban 97% of hemp market bill.
I thought it was a clean resolution.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the whole thing. That was what Mike Johnson was saying. It's just a clean CR. We're just going to fund the government.
We literally can't write anything else into this resolution. It only goes to 21 million Bitcoin.
Yeah. But that was the disingenuous part, right? Oh, there's nothing we can take out. It's so simple. It's so clean. No, not at all. In the Senate, the thing that they added, they snuck in just a whole bunch of stuff, right? Like this senator thing and then this hemp thing. What's frustrating is that because of the urgency of ending the shutdown, the House, instead of debating it, actually nitpicking and going, wait a second, in the reconciliation process going, no, we're not going to pay out real money to a bunch of senators from taxpayer money in the millions of dollars. No, that's not going to happen for like legal, legitimate law enforcement things that were happening in an investigation. And then, no, we're not going to shut down a $28 billion industry. Of course, we obviously want farmers who got hit with this tariff issue and the trade wars and the soybean market crumbling with China not buying soybeans. Of course, we're going to shut down a $28 billion industry that mostly farmers participate in, right? Because they're the ones who make the hemp products. Yes, of course, that's something we're going to do in this time of economic precarity. No debate, right? It sailed right through. President signed it. Okay, wait a second. So who ended the shutdown? People who wanted to sneak some stuff through, and they did.
Yeah. So it sounds like you think that it was a bad idea and that the 7 Dems shouldn't have flipped.
Yeah, look, they found a backbone just long enough to not find a backbone. That's what it irks me.
Won the election, too.
When the political winds were shifting the most and the pressure was the greatest, this is what's frustrating about the Democratic politicians right now in the country. Is right when they get to the point where they're winning, instead of just crossing the finish line and winning and getting the thing, instead of getting the getting the actual tangible, in this case, healthcare subsidies. No, we're just gonna cave. And it's no. At a minimum, what they should have done was go until the original deadline for the CR, the November 21st. This is the like cardinal rule of protests. You want to protest or even strikes, right? Like a labor strike, like a general labor strike. You want to strike and you want to protest at the point of maximal visibility and impact. So what would have been the most visible impact during the shutdown? It would have been air travel significantly diminished right at the moment when the most people in the country were traveling by air, Thanksgiving weekend. If the shutdown had gone at least until Thanksgiving weekend, there would have been real pressure, like tangible, unambiguous, unavoidable pressure on the part of the Republican representatives and senators to come with some agreement, some kind of compromise. Instead, what these senators did is gave them an out right at the moment that the pressure would have been the greatest. And that, I think, is what was so frustrating about it, is that it didn't take that many Democratic senators to crumble. They didn't hold, right? And they could have held until the maximum amount of impact. But no, they give up.
Do you think they'll be primaried? What is even the Democratic Party these days if there isn't some sort of mechanism of ensuring the collective, of finding a correspondence with the popular will?
The most simple answer is that, at least for the Senate, it's three different Democratic parties, right? It's whichever party's up for reelection, whichever party's up for the reelection in 4 years, and whichever party's up for reelection in 6 years. I guess the corollary would be those who aren't running for election at all because they're independent operators. So the party is only as strong as the willingness on the part of the participants to maintain their position and to help the other participants. And the incentives aren't necessarily there for those senators who voted to actually do that. For the independent senator in particular, he's got no real reason to help the Republicans or the Democrats. He's independent. So he'll just do whatever he thinks is best for his constituents, and his constituents will vote for him one way or the other. For the Democratic politicians, it's really a question of what their ambitions are. If they want to keep their job, then yeah, they have to follow the will of the voters and the Democratic caucus in general, because that's where they get their fundraising, their money, and the donor base is that you have to comply with what the all the Democratic senators want. But if they're not running for re-election, if their eye is on a different job, like a lobbyist or some other job in the private sector, or just retiring gracefully and writing books or something, or going on TV, then they don't really have that much of an incentive to actually go along with the general will of the people. They did when they were running for election, right? Because that's how you get elected. But once they're in office, it's very difficult to kick out a sitting senator. And so the only real thing they respond to is they're people, they're human beings, right? Is incentives. And the incentives are different if your eye isn't necessarily on the prize of getting political wins, but it's more of appeasing your future bread and butter, right? The people who are going to pay your paycheck, in this case, lobbyists or a private industry like corporations. Shutdowns are expensive. Shutdowns are very costly for certain segments of the economy. I'm sure if any of these senators are eyeing a job in lobbying or private industry, that they can make the very simple argument, look, I was instrumental in ending the shutdown, so I know how to navigate uncertainty and find a path forward that helps all stakeholders involved. So you should hire me for your corporation or your university or your lobbyist position because I'll do a good job. One of the issues actually with politics in the US is that a lot of these politicians, they're not all of them are like huge believers in government or even in like democracy necessarily at all. They're just using it as a step ladder, right, to the next thing. So Paul Ryan actually is a good example where he went from Speaker of the House to I think he became a lobbyist. It's okay.
Yeah, what a drop in dignity, too. Talk about falling off a cliff.
Because he got into Congress, right? He ran as VP, didn't win, and then became Speaker of the House for a while and then left, and then cashed out as a lobbyist. That is a pathway I think at least some of the members of Congress view as like a viable way to wealth and success and fortune. The only ones that are an exception to that are those who are already wealthy independently when they get into Congress. There's a handful that are there obviously because they want to be there. They want the power, they want the influence, or that they're part of a wealthy family. Kerry is a good example, or McCain was a good example, married to a beer heiress, or these politicians who don't have to worry about money so much as they're there for the political part of it, the actual like swaying the direction the country goes in. And that's an issue, right? Because they don't get paid as much as they would be making in the private sector. And so some of them are eyeing the options, not necessarily what's best for their constituents, but what's best for them. And it doesn't take that many people, as we saw in the shutdown. All it took was, I think, 7 senators.
Yeah, but Paul Ryan could have been a figure in history. He could have been, I don't know, Daniel Webster, like William Seward, like whoever it is. But to choose the out, that was the most, I remember at the time thinking to myself, that is the most harebrained idea that I have heard. And I said it to people, and a friend of mine said, think about what his life is now. His life is, you do a post on Twitter like once a week, you go to these functions, you make money, and you spend time with your family. And the way he put it, I was like, that does sound nice. But then I thought, but the country needs people to serve it. And I'm not a Paul Ryan aficionado, but he was clearly smart, so I don't know. If only for leisure and the family, then what for the country? I don't know.
Okay, so I was not being fair to Paul Ryan. He didn't necessarily become a lobbyist, but he did go on to sit on like corporate boards and a bunch of other and like foundations and stuff, which that's pretty common. But the point is that he went from being like Speaker of the House, like the very tippy top of power, to something else.
And he didn't have to, I don't think.
He didn't. No, I think he could have stayed. I think he was an effective speaker, and he just left because he wanted to. But that's the whole thing. It's like for some of these politicians, we don't know whether they're there because they want to help the country or they want to help themselves the most, and we won't know until after they leave.
Mondays with Mike.